okay.
The world is looking at El Paso.
What will we say to the world? Live from the KELP studio in El Paso, this is 915 Talk.
And now your host.
Good afternoon, beautiful citizens of the borderland. This is 915 Talk, and I am your host, Andy Frecka. And this is faith-based radio where we believe that God so loved the world, and that means he loves our community here in the borderland. And we love talking about everything that is related to this community. And today we have a very special guest. I say that every week. I know I say that every Friday, but today is going to blow your mind. Now, I'm about to do the introduction of our special guest, and I'm a little bit afraid that it will not intrigue you enough to stay on. So please listen through the whole thing, and then what I have to say after the introduction, what we're going to do today. So my very special guest today he's not from El Paso, so we have to find out how he got here. We all have our story, how we made it here, whether we were born or other life circumstances brought us here. He was born in Seattle, grew up in Montana and Connecticut. Not sure what his parents were up to, but then he moved to the borderland in 2004 as a missionary, not to El Paso, but to Juarez. He is bilingual, I think, because I've heard him speak Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish. But it seemed like everyone understood what he was saying. He is known as El Paso's most prolific used clothes salesman. I have it on very good, what's the word? I know for a fact that he makes the best pork belly taco in a very small neighborhood in central El Paso. In narrow athletic circles, he is widely considered to be a pickleball prodigy. He's a serial entrepreneur. So he owns a lot of businesses. I don't even know what they are, but the one that those of you who are in El Paso who are listening might know is the store that is known as Black Fridays. And without further ado, wherever you are, unless you're driving, let's put our hands together for the one, the only, Mr. David Kaufmann!
Do you embarrass everyone like this, Andy?
So welcome to the show, David. And he just asked me if I embarrass everyone on the show like this. I do my very best, but I thought you were listening to the show, so it's a little bit disappointing that you had to ask me that question. But what I didn't say about David is he and I are the two guys who decided to take on the responsibility of KELP Christian Radio. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And although his background as a used clothes salesman is super interesting, we're going to be talking more about the radio station today. But I'm going to interview him for a little bit, and then then I'm going to give him the opportunity to ask me questions. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because on 915 Talk, I'm the one who asks questions, but today we're going to make an exception. And just for those who aren't aware of what's going on at KELP, it was announced in February that there was going to be a transition and that we were the two who are taking things on. I'm the one that you're going to hear from more, so I hope you like my voice. And David is taking on more of an advisory support role, and he's absolutely essential to what's happening at the station. So I for sure want you all to hear from him as well. So, David, we're not going to get into used clothing, although that is a fascinating world, I'm sure. But I want to talk a little bit about your time as a missionary in Juarez.
Okay.
You're no longer a missionary in Juarez. You left in 2007, 2008. And this is a question I always want to ask people who were missionaries and aren't anymore. Do you think you were a good missionary?
Oh, that's. I want to hear what other people say to that. I learned a lot. First of all, thanks for having me on your very illustrative talk show. So excited to be here. And that's. I was going to school in Vermont, of all places, and I wanted to travel the world and just see what was going on. And so I got Some of my parents.
So you went to Juarez.
So I went to Juarez. That was my punchline, Andy. Let me get there. My parents went to Bible college, and one of their close friends was working at an orphanage in Juarez, and I spent some time with them. And so I went and spent a summer working in that, volunteering at that orphanage, and got connected with some people doing ministry across Juarez. And all the time while I went to college, I just kept coming back for a spring break here, bringing some friends with me, spent the summer. And then as I was finishing school, it was kind of like go and find, kind of a normal job, quote unquote, or kind of come and be part of this team of people serving and working in Juarez, and that was by far the most intriguing choice for me. And so
Right.
It was a year, and that year turned into 2, and that turned into 2 more. And so I'm not going to answer your question because no, I look back and thank God that He's gracious to the youth, because I had no clue what I was doing. Oh my goodness. But we had some great teachers and met some great people, great pastors in Juarez, and lived in a neighborhood and got loved on by so many people and loved so many people. So it was vital and integral in my growth and development, part of my life and story, and I'm so grateful.
So I love what you said. We didn't know what we were doing. So how do you feel about taking on responsibility of a radio station? Do you feel like you know what you're doing?
Oh. So thank God that there's grace for the older people too. So God has certainly seemed to have given me an exciting a love for new things, and so I went and did that adventure, and have been on a ride and adventure then, doing different business things, continued to be involved in church and different ministry there. And when you and I started talking about this, it was something that didn't fit either of our profiles, but it felt like something we couldn't really shake. Mm-hmm. It was, as we're in this now, it feels like, okay, we see God's hand, but really I feel like, much like I had no clue what I was actually signing up for when I came to Juarez. I don't know what we've signed up for here, but everything that I've been a part of with you and meeting the people here, and as I've talked to people, just so excited to be part of a history of what God has done in and through and by the way that God has used Christian radio to be part of discipling, training, and even evangelizing people. It seems like the things that I feel like I've learned is like, radio isn't it's something we listen to alone. We're in the car, you got your headphones on, you're in your house, you're doing a project, and so it's something that people go to, and we've heard so many stories now about how when God was calling people to Him in silent ways, in private ways, in ways that only in our own hearts we can hear God's calling sometimes, radio was one of the ways in which people began to learn about Jesus through the preaching, through the teaching, through the verses, through the Bible, that they began to the word was sown into their lives, into their hearts. And so people say, well, why are you doing this? And I just say, ultimately, we feel called to do this.
Right.
We feel like God has given us this, put this in front of us to do. And so,
yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about on the front end, because we might talk later. I also have some missionary experience, but it's hard to tell while you're in the ministry if you did well. Did you do the Lord's bidding? And it's hard to tell even after you're not in that ministry. So let me ask you a question that's probably not as personal or impossible to answer as, were you a good missionary? With the radio station, how will we know that we're doing the Lord's bidding?
Oh, well, I hope we hear it in our prayer life. I hope the Holy Spirit speaks to us, guides us about what to do and how to do it. Counsel of many people who are love us and first love the Lord and are committed to discipleship. I hope our listeners share with us. I hope they talk and share and communicate. And I think so. One of the interesting things is that kind of this is one expression of the kingdom of God is
Right.
what happens here. So the voices we hear, Andy, we've heard stories of people who, longtime listeners or regular listeners, you begin to build. It's almost like a friendship with the pastors.
Yeah.
you a sense of knowing them, knowing who they are, and so there is a community that builds around radio, I believe. And so I hope that we hear from people. And again, one story doesn't mean success or.
I kind of feel like so I've never been on a blind date, but I kind of feel like that's what we're on right now with the listeners, because the listeners don't know us, we don't know them, but we really hope you like us. Because we have a long journey ahead of us, and I was reading this morning in 1 Corinthians 1, a passage I read many, many years ago, quite a lot when I was first going into ministry. And brothers, remember who you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise, not many of you were of noble birth, but God chose the weak to shame the strong. God chose the things that are not to bring to nothing the things that are. And why did he do that? So that no human being can boast in his presence. And I think here we're in the very first days of taking on this responsibility. And I think it's kind of a wonderful thing to say that we don't know Christian radio really. We're doing this, I'll speak for myself. We're doing this just as, like you said, a calling. We believe God has called us to this. When we ask you as a listener to pray, we actually want you to pray. We're not saying that as a platitude or just out of tradition. But I believe in our weakness. I believe God really wants to do something special in El Paso, and I do hope that this radio station will be a part of that. So before we get more into all of that, the radio station, I think people out there are really wondering, who is David Kaufmann really? And what are his views on, the hot topics here in the borderland. So I want you to just give me your, this is the rapid fire question phase of the program. And I want you to give me your honest answer as quickly as possible so that those listeners out there will know who you are, David Kaufmann.
Okay.
So without further ado, Kenny on the board, cue up the lightning round. So, David, first question in the lightning round that I want to ask you about is, and I think this will tell people out there who you really are as far as how you view life in El Paso. Chico's Tacos, yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
After 10 p.m.
Okay, and in this abbreviated version of the lightning round, I also think that, I know this is a biblical teaching station, so people are going to want to know, do you really know the Word of God?
Okay.
So let's do a little bit of Bible trivia. Revelation chapter 4, the throne room of heaven. There are 4 creatures. What body part are those 4 creatures covered with?
Wings?
No, yeah, they do have wings. That's correct, but there's a body part they are covered with. What is that body part?
His eyes?
He's saying that into his microphone as if not everyone out there could hear it. He said eyes. Kenny on the board. Cue up the applause. Woo. Okay, they are covered with ice, and they're singing about what they see. They're saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And they say that over and over through all eternity because they see the holiness of God. It's an amazing scene that I can't wait to be a part of. But I want you to name as many of those four living creatures as you can for extra credit.
I don't know. I can't remember. There's like, I don't know.
Not a single one, not even a guess.
Isn't there like an eagle or a...
Eagle, hit up the applause. Kitty on the board, come on.
I can't remember. I don't know. My wife's been studying Revelations.
Yes.
I haven't been recently.
Well, you know, I can't call Jen right now, so it is an eagle. You're not going to guess anymore. No more. So it's a lion, an ox, and another creature who has a face like a man, but I don't know what the rest of his body looks like. So I hope that you won't only be, providing support for the station, but you'll be listening to some of the programs so you can even learn more about what's in the Word. So thank you, David, for bravely going through this first abbreviated round of the lightning round. And today, as we're talking, what I want to say is if you're out there listening and you're super concerned about the future of KELP, and you're like, these guys, I'm very concerned. What I want you to do is send me a text message at 915-265-8489. Unless you're driving, do not text, pull over. But send us a text. You could say something nice to us. That'd be great. 915-265-8489, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. So, David, I'm going to hand it over to you. You can... this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to ask some questions.
Yeah, Andy. So, I'm excited to be working with you. This, like as we've said, this calling is something that, Pam and Arnie and Pam McClatchy stewarded this radio station for 40 years.
Right.
And when we learned, and Pam shared that it had been 40 years, I mean, 40 years is kind of a biblically kind of like a generational,
right,
for an entire generation. And so we're really thankful that Pam and has continued as Arnie's with the Lord, and we're just excited to see what happens. So, but my question for you is, I had this very simple life living in the States, and
right.
I went across my missions brought me about 4 miles outside the United States, but,
right.
but your life was a little different. So
right.
Tell us a little bit about why you and your wife spent some of the last 25 years, 23 of those years living in Russia.
Living in Russia. So, Tina, bring me my iPad, please. Yeah, sorry about that. I had a special message for Tina, the office manager. So yeah, I as I've said before on 915 Talk and kind of alluded to, I am new to the El Paso. I never thought in my wildest dreams that I was going to be spending any portion of my life here in the border. I do find that to be extremely interesting, but the fun part is learning about a new culture. I'm American, but Borderland is its own culture. Learning, getting to know a community in a new way, kind of maybe a fresh set of eyes from the side, So, but before all this, I was in Russia for 23 years with my family as we were there as missionaries. We first were for 11 years in a city called Perm, which is close to Siberia, a city of about 1 million people that no one's ever heard of. We were then in Moscow for 12 years. My wife, when we were in Perm, Rachel, she was part of starting King's Kids. I know a lot of people in El Paso know the King's Kids ministry here. She grew up in that ministry here in El Paso, and she was a part of starting that ministry in Russia, and also instrumental in starting it in some other former Soviet republics. in Moscow, she was the head of the International Christian School, which was a school that was started for basically missionary kids. We were there for 23 years. It was a life that we loved. It was a life that we never thought we would leave. As a matter of fact, we were all in 100% to living in Russia. So 2 years ago, Russia made the decision to invade Ukraine, and we were kind of warned that it wasn't good for us to stay, and we had to flee very quickly, with our 4 kids. And we ended up, we actually originally flew to Ohio, where I'm from, where I grew up. And then we came to El Paso. And long story short, we ended up here. And that's where we're at now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would, and so how did you, when you were working in Russia, you were part of Youth with a Mission. How did you view that work vocationally? What kind of things were you doing?
Yeah. So when we first went to Russia, we were, I guess, probably not typical or normal missionaries, but a little bit more normal. So we were doing things like prison ministry in the maximum security prisons that are like Siberian prisons, like Gulag style. We were doing a lot of orphanage ministry, street children ministry. We were doing missionary training schools and sending Russian missionaries around the world. And it was an exciting time of just building something out of nothing. I moved there when I was 22 years old, and kind of, my first goal was just to be there at least 6 months so it wouldn't be embarrassing when I went back home. And 23 years later, I was still there. So we were there like that. And then the ministry had grown, and I was looking for what would be something really difficult to do. So the place in Russia that I considered most difficult to do ministry was Moscow. And that's where we ended up. It's a metropolis, including the metro area is about 20 million people. It's also incredibly wealthy, busy. People don't have time very often to think of spiritual things, and so it was quite a challenge. And we started doing a lot of the same things we were doing in Perm. We also ended up doing ministry with gypsies. We were doing work. Fighting human trafficking, that whole trade that is shocking around the world, but was very, very big in Moscow. And we were also doing the missionary training schools. But at some point along the way, I was really meditating on how the Word became flesh. John 1, I think it's verse 9, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory. And I think a lot of times as missionaries, as kind of I jokingly call us professional Christians, we're very good in talking about God, but we don't know how to live a life in a way that people around us understand how to live that life. And I think a lot of times as a Western missionary, it's very easy to receive support, financial support, and you live a life that's parallel with the nation you're in. And what does parallel mean? You never actually really come into contact with it. You're there, but you don't come in contact with it in a real way. And so with that, at that time, there was a lot of pressure in Russia concerning, missionaries. And so I began looking into more and more of what, is called tent making in Christian circles, where basically you're supporting your family, not through financial missionary support, which is kind of the traditional way, but you're making your own way. And in my case, I was looking at how can I do this as a Russian, so that a Russian person could look at me and say, oh, I can do that too. I don't have to go to America and travel to churches and tell them what a great person I am. I can live like this. So with that, I had a real estate agency in Moscow. We had a trucking company in Siberia. We were just doing all these different things to see how we could really be involved with what's going on in the community and live a life that was above the corruption and that we saw around us. So there were those things. Was a part of quite a few different projects, including medical tourism. There's medical care in Russia that is not available in the U.S., and so we're seeing patients come from the U.S. to Russia, which is surprising to a lot of people. So I was doing that, and then a little bit of media work. I did. This is my radio experience. If anyone's taking notes at home, I was a co-host for a Christian radio morning show for a little while there in Moscow. Then I was going on TV from time to time on the political talk shows as the American. They were really, I was kind of their punching bag, but it was a lot of fun and kind of a way to just really be a part of what's going on in the nation. And then the one that a lot of people chuckle about is I did for a while host a show on Moscow's main TV channel where I would take foreigners on tours around Moscow and show them things that don't exist. It was a prank show. So that was a lot of fun.
Is that what this is?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what the camera's up for. In the middle of all this, I forgot to mention I had a quail farm and was looking at farming and just how can we be a part of everything, just live. I believe we're on earth to live life to the fullest and together with God. And our God is, he's infinitely creative. I don't believe he's stopped creating new realities. I believe he wants to create new realities everywhere in order to reach more people for Christ.
So if I recall, because the church here in El Paso that I'm a part of, St. Clement's, I think supported you and Rachel through that traditional missionary funding.
Shout out to St. Clement's.
Yeah, well, but if you actually came and said thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah. Stop doing that.
Stop giving us money.
Yes, I did do that.
Do people ask for people to stop giving them money?
It's not traditional.
So help me understand. How would you find? Can you think of a story or any particular person where you felt like you were able to? God put you in situations to minister, to love, to care for someone that you never could have if you hadn't taken a step to move into that tent making, or that being part of commerce and. Yeah,
well, I really enjoyed especially the medical tourism part because I was put in a situation where I was able to actually travel and speak at like business conferences and share some biblical values, and sort of, I hate to use this phrase, there's probably a better way to say it, but hey, I'm here, I'm doing regular work, I believe in God, and I'm not crazy, I'm not a nutcase, I'm here with you guys.
I believe the first two parts of that.
But I was able to share biblical values in that while speaking at these business conferences. That was a lot of fun. With the prank show, it was a pretty big production, and I would look at all these people in this production, all these producers, cameraman, everything else, and there were so many times where I was just able to share little things about the gospel, and I looked at them. They're never going to darken the door of a church otherwise. They're not going to come to the very worthy ministry of a soup kitchen for the homeless that we were doing.
Yeah.
Very worthy, and we continue doing that. But they're not the ones who are going to come. And you look around at the people who are wealthy in the high-rise skyscrapers in Moscow, just like I already said, incredibly wealthy city. They're dying without God. They also need him. And it was so much fun to be in these little situations where I could just share my faith in these, the glass skyscraper with these other businessmen, where they are also people who would never, ever even think of going to a church on Sunday.
What would you say to someone who is in a position to give up, because that takes some faith to give up something that's there and secure for something that might not be there financially? What advice, or how would you counsel someone who's in a situation where are they actually going to give up some security to follow God?
Well, I don't want to nitpick about theology, but I'm pretty sure we never give up anything for God. But at the same time, we can go through difficult times, so it's both. But what I see is when Jesus called the disciples, they were fishing. He said, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." And they had no idea what he was talking about. They didn't understand, like he was saying, "Oh, let's do street evangelism. Let's do this. Let's do that." He just said, "Follow me." That's all they understood. And they left everything and followed him. That means that they even left the fish that they had just caught. I mean, that's what blows my mind the most. The biggest dream of their life was to catch all those fish.
Yeah.
And Jesus gave it to them. And then he said, "Leave it and follow me." And I think over and over in Scripture, what you see is where God is calling people to follow him, and he's not telling them what's going to happen. Abraham left his house and went to live in tents. He left his house even though he did not know where he was going. And the most important thing in life is not what you're going to do, it's who you're doing it with. And I look at that decision. It was not easy. I agonized over it for quite a long time. The result of that decision to go off traditional support actually was very difficult for our family financially. It wasn't like the real estate agency was doing so well that amount was covered. Our income level as a family went down severely, and there are some things in life that I will never understand, But what we know is that we follow after Christ.
Was that hard in your marriage?
Well, one of these days I'm going to have the most special guest ever on this podcast or on this radio program. It'll be my wife, Rachel, and I'll definitely have to ask her that. It was not an easy time. It was not an easy time.
Did you doubt it?
Of course. Yeah, I think, honestly, this is probably not what people want to hear from the new, person who's taking on the management of a radio station. But we don't really know how to judge our own actions. I asked you if you're a good missionary. Our hearts are so deceptive, we don't know. And so I think that often those who move out the most in faith are the ones who struggle with doubt the most.
Yeah. Okay, so I walked through some of this transition to El Paso with you,
right?
Just so have seen it, but 23 years. You're serving God, right? You're like one of the good Christians, right? Isn't that?
Yeah, I don't know if I was a good Christian, but I was a professional Christian.
Professional Christian, yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to get that wrong. And then literally a entire life of work. Is pulled out from under you.
Right.
You feel. You shared, you tested, you felt you had a few days, and you felt you had a choice, and you took the choice was for my family to come ultimately to El Paso.
Right.
How did your family handle that? How did you handle that? Your entire vocational identity, your professional Christian identity.
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I've had to. It's hard to even identify your own emotions. But one of the things that was difficult for me was I was very good at living in Russia. And living in El Paso, none of those skills are transferable. It was weird. Like I showed up here and almost exactly 2 years ago, just a little bit more. And I open up the job search website and I'm like, none of this fits. Absolutely nothing. I know how to do all these things, and all of those things are completely useless in El Paso. So that was a shock. I mean, what took a little bit of the pain away was knowing that the Moscow police had called me and they were doing a criminal investigation on me. So that took away some of the concern. I do want to quickly say it was completely bogus. They were doing this to a lot of Americans at that time, which some of you, I'm sure, who are listening heard on the news, and I was just happened to be one of them. But for my children, it was particularly hard because they're teenagers. They, as a teenager, your life is your friends, and they were ripped away from them in just a matter of a few days.
Yeah.
And my wife, as I already mentioned, was the head of the International Christian School in Moscow. So that was not an easy transition.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And so you're here now, and how's that transition been? I mean,
yeah.
What do you think about Chico's Tacos?
Yeah. So the job I found when I arrived. So my wife ended up. She's really smart and spiritual and just a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And I would hasten to say she has something beyond a high school education.
Uh-huh.
So she has transferable skills, and she quickly got a job. She's now the head of school at Emmanuel Christian School. For me, I was just looking at how to put food on the table. And so I can't say exactly what I was doing, but I was visiting a lot of homeowners in El Paso and sharing with them just the financial benefits of renewable energy.
Oh, okay.
And so for those of you out there who are listening right now, what I would want to say that I learned during that time is very often the least open to talk homeowners are those with Bible verses on the front of their houses. So I do hope that you would see these opportunities when door-to-door salesmen come to just meet someone, learn something new, be kind.
So Andy, you have said though that that in the chance to walk through the streets of El Paso, that you learned a lot about kind of community and some of it was startling.
Yeah. So I left America 23 years ago. We did come back from time to time, but that wasn't really like living here. We come for a couple months or whatever every 4 or 5 years, and it was shocking for me to go door to door. So I do joke around about this job I had of going door to door selling solar panels for a year and a half in El Paso. And I was even one of the guys who had a whole team bugging entire neighborhoods. But during that time, I met a lot of people. And when you are in sales, what's interesting is you really get to know people's situations, the problems they're in. You find out, you're talking to the guy, he's like, I really want to do this for my house, but actually my wife and I are probably going to get a divorce in a month. You just find out what's going on in their life. And what I was shocked by was just how lonely people in America are right now. And in El Paso, I met thousands of people. And in a period of a year and a half, I had to keep that quota up on that door to door. But I met thousands of people, and it was shocking. It was just, I would walk into a neighborhood and I would know more people in that neighborhood in 20 minutes than many of the people who had lived there for 20 years. And you would see people come to their house after work. The garage door opens, the car goes in, the garage door closes. They've ordered delivery for their food. They're on the Netflix. They are not having normal human interaction that we are created for. And it's creating a level of anger in society that is not healthy. And I would be in a neighborhood, and it was fascinating how I would introduce neighbors to each other after being there literally only 20 minutes. And it made me very concerned for both America and El Paso. It's a society that's splintered. It's a society where the media would love it if every single person in America, in the world, was on their own device, their iPad, their phone, their TV, computer, whatever, in their own room watching separate shows. That's what secular media is doing. So here at the radio station as Christian media, what we need to be looking at is how we can bring people together. And what I would encourage those who are listening to do is meet your neighbors, bake an apple pie and take it to them. This is normal human interaction. This is what we're called to be.
Mm-hmm. So we're called to
bake apple pies.
Love our neighbors.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So actual neighbors.
Yes, actual neighbors.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, you want to take a break? Oh, what's going on?
Before we go on break,
Okay.
you did not answer a very important question.
Oh, Kenny on the board. His microphone works, folks.
Chico's Tacos, yes or no?
He said yes.
You did say yes?
No, I didn't say
No,
that.
you.
Oh,
He asked you.
me. Oh, I didn't answer. Kenny on the board. I'm going to have to turn off that microphone. So, Chico's Tacos. I went there once, and those of you who are from El Paso will think this is hilarious, but I had driven past there many times, and that parking lot was just jam-packed full of cars. And I was like, this has to be the most amazing taco in the world. And we would talk about it as a family because we saw that parking lot was on Dyer was always jam-packed. And so one day I said to my sons, I said, let's go try Chico's Tacos. We had no idea what we're getting ourselves into. And I went up to the front, I went to the cash register, I made my order, and then I had to make the walk of shame to the ATM because I didn't know it was cash only. I'd never heard of this. This is not the way it is in Russia. Moscow had Apple Pay way before America. And so I had to make the walk of shame. And then I'm going to be honest. I've been to, I think, 40 nations around the world. I've tried a lot of different foods. And I'm going to have to try Chico's Tacos again. Because that was the only time I went, and I didn't quite understand it. So that's my answer. Inconclusive at this time. So
I guess we know where we need to go tonight.
Yeah.
All right. So I would say how. So as you look at at Christian radio, because one of the things you've been doing a lot is you've been just getting to know just kind of the Christian community, meeting with pastors, meeting with people involved in ministry, because and when we think about where does KELP fit,
right?
We've been talking about, hey, we as Christian radio, we are part of the kingdom,
right?
Again. Christian radio is not central. It's not it's God didn't give radio first and then the Bible or something like that. But your understanding, and you've been meeting with pastors. So what have you been learning as you've been meeting with people, talking about the kingdom of God in El Paso? Right.
Well, I am also pretty surprised at the situation in El Paso. And it's a city I've, of course, come to because my wife is from here. We were married in El Paso. But what I'm learning as I'm talking to people, and this is not a statistic, it's just more what I'm hearing from different pastors is, and this number I'm about to give is not really a fair representation of everything, but it does tell us something. And what I'm hearing is it would be very optimistic to say that 6% of the population in El Paso is attending church on any given Sunday, including the Catholic Church. And so when we look at that, I think we need to become a little bit more desperate as a church in El Paso. I think we've become used to things being the way they are, and it doesn't bother us that so many of our neighbors don't have that relationship with Christ that we claim has changed our lives. And so how are we going to live differently? How are we going to pray differently? How are we going to reach out to our neighbors differently? Because, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And I feel that's probably where we're at right now. So as a radio station, I think I look at it and I hope, that really we can be a place where people can listen and join in prayer together across the borderland. That's the first thing. I do hope that we are as far as I know, the only locally managed English language Christian radio station. So what I would really like to see is for us to really talk about what's happening here in El Paso, happening in Juarez, Las Cruces, and what can we do? Because my concern is that Paul wrote Timothy, and he said, in the last days, people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, greedy, disobedient to their parents. He gives this whole list, and then he says, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And then he says, always learning but never coming to a knowledge of truth. And my concern is, as we continue the legacy of biblical teaching here on KELP, that our faith is put into action, that we can call each other into some kind of action to serve our neighbors, that these biblical programs that we will continue to air will not result in just more head knowledge. Because the problem with that is just having that head knowledge, an increase in knowledge after listening to any kind of teaching anywhere, results in the worst kind of pride, which is spiritual pride, instead of humility and how can we go out and serve our neighbors. So that's what I'm seeing when I look at the city, when I'm talking to pastors. I see also there was a time in El Paso, and I had Pastor Wally Chapman in here several weeks ago talking about that there was a time when pastors were getting together, praying together. And when you look at the history of any kind of spiritual renewal anywhere in the world, usually one of two things happened. Either it was two older ladies had been praying together for 20, 30 years, and then God showed up. Or, and I'm being very general here, but that's one. But the other is a group of men decided that they wanted things to be different. And I think a lot of those men who are here in El Paso in the past are either older or they've gone on to be with the Lord. And it's time for the group of men who are here now not to look over our shoulder for this older generation to come back and do what they were doing, but it's our time. And so yeah, that's what I see.
Andy, share with me the vision. So you've been about 915 Pray.
Right.
So 915 Pray is a daily.
Every weekday, correct.
Yeah. Why don't you talk through that and what's your vision? Explain that to us.
Yeah. So 915 Pray. I hope that people have been listening to it, and not just listening, but joining in prayer. Prayer is such an amazing subject to even begin to understand. We can spend our whole lives studying it and not fully understand, but God does respond to us reaching out to him, and he particularly loves it when we reach out to him together, and as a church, as a small group, and as a community. And you see that over and over, both in scripture and in history. And so, here at KELP, there is the afternoon show on Saturday, Prayer and Answers, where people, listeners can call in and ask for prayer for personal needs. And that's absolutely essential in the kingdom of God. But the other thing is we need to be praying for our community, not just what's happening in our own personal lives. We need to look beyond that. And so what we began to do with Pastor Randy is just look at just different topics that are happening around the city, and not for Pastor Randy's the host, not just for him to lead a prayer, but to have someone who's involved in that particular area to come in and lead the prayer. And it's been a lot of fun seeing all these people come into the station and just lead a prayer for whatever their particular area is, whether it be jail ministry or border issues or whatever it may be. There are so many things in our community that need prayer, and it's time for us to join together and pray.
So how can listeners, where do they hear that? And then how can they, is it on any social media or anything?
Yeah, so the number one way that we would love for you to listen in on is by just listening to the broadcast at 9:15 a.m. or 9:15 p.m. on weekdays. However, not everyone's able to do that. Sadly, some people work at 9:15 a.m. So, also it's probably obvious to everyone, but just in case someone missed it, 9:15. It's the 915. We're praying for the 915. So I hope everyone caught that. But if anyone missed it, please go to KELPradio.com. Look for that 915 pray link. Listen to some of those prayers that have happened over the past weeks and now months, and join with prayer for those things. These are not professional Christians leading these prayers. These are just people just like all of us who just love the Lord and are doing something for their neighbors. And let's support them in prayer. And yeah, so KELPradio.com is the place to find all those prayers.
Okay, that's great.
The sad thing I want to say is if you go on KELPradio.com is you're not going to hear the song of the day. So if you listen to the broadcast, you can hear an old hymn, maybe by the Gaithers, or a more modern worship hymn. It's a lot of fun, and I think an important part of the program.
How have you been selecting, you and Pastor Randy, how have you been selecting the themes or the things in which, because you're doing each week thematically, right?
Yes. Each week is a different theme. That's correct. So how are we choosing it? I would like to believe that we're praying and God is giving us those directions. But it also, I'll add to that, that it's been fun as people come in, they tell us about something else that's happening in the community, and we're learning, and they're like, you gotta pray for that, you gotta pray for this. And so in the coming weeks, you're gonna hear more and more of these kind of prayers. We're gonna be praying for UTEP in a few weeks, for the colleges. Also the week of July 8th, we're gonna have a week of praying for KELP, because like I said at the beginning of the program, we really actually need your prayers. We are just saying that.
Yeah. And so tell me, so you've been kind of volunteering here, trying to learning about the radio station as we've been preparing to kind of take over the management of this. But what have been some of the ways in which you've seen and heard God moving in people's lives in and around and involved in radio?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I grew up listening to Christian preaching radio, just like KELP. The station was in Ohio. There was no other radio station in my house that was on ever. That would have been a very bad thing to do. As a matter of fact, I did one time turn on a music Christian radio station, and I got in trouble.
Las Cruces in southern New Mexico.
So
you
that's
rebel! You were such a rebel, Andy.
Yeah. So when I came to KELP, I didn't really know what it was like for the listener, just because since I grew up listening to Christian preaching, I thought everyone grew up listening to Christian preaching.
Okay.
Yeah, and so as it turns out, that's not the case.
Okay.
And so it's been super fun to get to know the listeners. Some of them who who did not grow up with this, who are serious about getting into the Word of God, learning more. There's, of course, the Word of God is you can never get to the end of learning, and they're passionate about hearing these different sermons, these different teachings throughout the day. That has been super fun. And then I also met someone recently. It was the first person I met who had this situation. It was someone whose wife had come to know the Lord, and he was secretly listening to KELP. So he would sneak out to the garage and listen to KELP. He was not saved, his wife was.
So his wife was saved, but he wasn't. But he didn't want to admit it, but he was starting to listen.
Exactly. And so he was out in the garage one day listening to KELP, and it was a sermon by Adrian Rogers. And just in the middle of the sermon, he broke down crying and gave his life to the Lord.
Wow.
And you look at that, and it's powerful.
Wow. Yeah.
So
tell us, Andy, how are you viewing kind of the future of KELP? Is it more of the same? Is it what are you excited about in these coming weeks and months?
Well, I think what I'm excited about is as we look forward to the future is we're going to continue the legacy of teaching and talk, biblical teaching and discussion. So I am excited about that. In the afternoons, I think first of all, there's going to be schedule updates. And what I would like to say to everyone is you're going to see all your favorite Bible teachers in that schedule. And so be looking out for that. And then during the afternoon, what we're going to see is a little bit more talk, whether it be a Christian finance program, current events, or some more family type discussion. And what I hope is that will be edifying to our regular listeners, but also be engaging to those who are like this guy in the garage who don't yet know the Lord. It'll be engaging, and start tuning in more and more, they'll catch some of the more maybe I want to say heavy theological teaching programs that will continue to be on, the R.C. Sproul's, the David Jeremiah's, and all of those. So that's what we're going to see. And then particularly between the programs, those transitions, what I'm hoping is what kind of our goal, I think I can say is that anytime anyone turns on KELP, they will hear something useful, whether it be biblical teaching, biblical discussion, but then also between the programs, we want to make it a lot more local. So local announcements, local ministry opportunities, so that we will not always be learning but never coming to a knowledge of truth, but that we'll actually be putting our faith into action. So hopefully we're going to have a lot more of those ministry opportunities for our listeners between the programs. And the other thing I'm excited about are Saturdays. I really hope that we're going to have that Saturdays will be KELP will be a part of everyone's Saturdays. So in the morning on Saturdays, a lot of people aren't able to listen to these teaching programs throughout the week. And so if you missed those teaching programs, you can get that on Saturday morning. And then as you're going around doing your errands or working around your house, we're going to have some of those discussion programs starting around 9 in the morning and going until the early afternoon. And then in the evening, back to teaching. And so I really hope that everyone listening will know that you can feed your mind, feed your spirit by listening to KELP. Every time you turn it on, you're going to hear something useful.
So you hear something useful every
Yes.
time you turn on the radio.
Yes. This is not, entertainment radio. It's not for tickling your ears. It's you have to. It's where you have to actually be listening, and you'll hear something useful.
Okay. And then how can listeners, how can they communicate to you, or how can they share their thoughts, or how can they be involved in the ministry of KELP?
Right. So I would say, first of all, what I really want to communicate to you who are listening is we want to be together with you in this. This is El Paso's Christian station. And so let's all take ownership of this ministry together. And we love feedback. So there are a few different ways of doing that. One is you can just use the contact form on the website, KELPradio.com. We read all of those messages and try to respond to all of them, assuming they're reasonably polite. We have a phone number, 915-779-0016. We love getting those phone calls, just hearing feedback, particularly positive feedback. Very often the phone calls are only for, where did R.C. Sproul go? Well, he moved a time slot over. Everything's okay in the world. So, but we love that. And I invite listeners to come over to the station for a tour. I love showing people around the station, and so just give us a call and we'll find a time. And it's easy. Just come on over. So we'd love to talk to you, get to know you, and we're running out of time on this program right now.
Thank you, and we hope that for everyone listening that they find something useful, even with this interview.
Yes. Yes, thank you, David. And for our listeners, just a reminder, you can find all of 915 Talk on KELPradio.com. Listen to those past episodes, and thank you for listening today.
God bless.
You have been listening to 915 Talk on KELP Christian Radio. To listen to past recordings of 915 Talk, just visit KELPradio.com and click on the 915 Talk link. Until next time, love your neighbor, love your city, and give God all the glory.